Hello, welcome. My name is Jan and I would like to give you introduction to Git. So what is planned for today? Firstly, we will explain what is version control and why we need it. Next, I will introduce you to Git, which is form of version control. We will cover key Git commands, and in the end, we will talk how we can connect GitHub and Google Collab. Let me explain why we need version control. And I will give you example how it looks like if we don't have any version control system. Imagine we have some file. It can be, for example, Excel, CSV, Python. In order to save changes, we save multiple versions of files. Let's say version 1, version 2, version 5, final, final. But you can see that this is not very sustainable, and we will quickly end up with many files and no history of versions, no possibility of tracking changes, no sustainable way of versioning control. Now we can talk about what is version control. It can be defined as a system that allows us to track changes and history of multiple versions of code or any documents over the time. And this has many key benefits. It first of all helps us to collaborate in project team, so multiple developers can work effectively simultaneously on the same project. We can track history of all changes, so we can see where we edit new code or remove old one, and we can revert back to any version from the history. Also, there are two features that are super useful for team collaboration. It's called branching and merging, which will be explained in another slide. But basically, it's a technique that allows us to work on parallel on different versions of code base. Now let me proceed to introduction to Git. Git is a specific distributed version control system for software project. Distributed means that we don't have one specific project folder, but we work on multiple versions of the same project. It was introduced in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, who is creator of Linux operation system. Nowadays it's become essential tool for any modern developer. Now we cannot imagine to work without Git anymore, and it's integrated into major development environments such as VS Code, PyCharm, and so on. To better understand Git, we will cover three concepts. We will firstly talk about what is project repository and what are the type of repositories. Then we will look at key commands that we can use to manipulate code and version. And then we will look at the concept of branching and merging. Now we will explain concept of repositories. Repository is basically a project folder. It's a collection of all files and subfolders that Git tracks and monitor changes. And this folder can contain code files such as Python, C++, and so on, but also data files, password, Python environments, and some other files. We distinguish two types of repositories. There is remote repository that is used to store global version of the code, but then we have also local copies of repository which is used by individual developers for their project work. In order to execute version control, we are using a set of instructions called git commands. The first command we need is git clone, that is used to create copy of remote repository into local folder, which we can start using and start tracking changes. Once we develop new code and make changes, we can send changes to local repository using git commit. In this git push, we can send changes to remote repository. Another useful command is git status that will help us to check in which branch we are and also check history of this branch. With git checkout, we can switch between project branches, And lastly, we have two commands, git fetch and git pull, to access changes from a remote server. Branches are useful for organizing project flow and collaboration. There are two types of branches. Domain or master is used to keep the most updated production version, and it cannot be deleted. However, when we're developing new feature, new functionality, we don't want to work directly on master because we might destroy something or we might lose part of the code. So it's usually good practice to set up new branch for maybe development of new functionality or fixing bug, where we can develop our code with different version, test functionality, and only once we are happy, we can merge the changes back to master. This leads us to another concept that is called pull request. As we mentioned before, we develop code in separate branches. However, once we want to merge our changes into master, we usually need to go through so-called pull request. This is the process that assures quality of the code, because in pull request we need usually 2 or 3 approvals by different person who check the quality of the code, the structure of the code, and whether it fits into the master. And only once we have those approvals, we are able to merge our changes into master. GitHub is nowadays the most popular platform for storing of remote repositories. It has around 100 million users and 200 million repositories. And also almost every Python package is using GitHub to store their version of codebase. However, it's good to know there are also some other alternatives like Bitbucket and GitLab. We will be using for our sessions Google Collab, and it is using in background Git version for tracking history of the code, and we can also save Collab notebook into GitHub. And we will see in practice session how we can use Git inside Collab. So that's all for today, and thanks for listening.